Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, and listeners. Today we've got a great guest, and he's speaking to us all the way from Melbourne. His name's Eric Peck, and he's the CEO and co-founder of Swoop Aero. And I promise you, the background and the information that's going to be provided by Eric is not only interesting, but a lot of people out there will see the merits of it and what a great innovative service they're providing. So firstly, Eric, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks very much for having me, Chris. Really appreciate the opportunity.
That's an absolute pleasure. And just a little bit of background about yourself. So I termed you as an action man and also a very clever, intelligent man as well. So if you can give us just a little bit of background of how you came to be in this business and what this business actually is.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess first off, if you can't tell by my accent, I'm an Australian, so don't hold that against me. So kind of went to high school here in Australia. I left school and joined the Air Force, so we've got an extra A in our Air Force, the RAAF, compared to the guys over in the UK with the RAF. Went through the military academy, basic flying training, advanced flying training. Actually got selected to be a fighter pilot initially. And so went through and started fighter training. But I actually got airsick when I was chasing the other aircraft around the sky dogfighting. So I wasn't particularly good at doing that. And the other guy always would have killed me. So I got kicked off flying fighter jets. And I flew another aircraft called the Hercules, the nice J model with a heads-up display and the glass cockpit. And flew that for a number of years. Ended up as a captain after doing a couple of tours of the Middle East and a fair bit of humanitarian work around Southeast Asia in the Australian backyard. And then decided that I wanted to expand what I was looking at a little bit during that time. I went and studied an MBA. And then at the start of 2017, jumped out of the Air Force and made a move into management consulting here in Australia. I worked at a small firm called Pollen in Sydney, and then moved down to Melbourne, which is my hometown, and joined Deloitte. I worked in the strategy and operations team, and was kind of really always driven to solve these big challenges. You know, I'd had with all the time in the Air Force, every day you're problem solving, and every day you're kind of working on these big challenges, whether you're doing a humanitarian operation or you're moving troops around or you're supporting in the Middle East. And so when did that in the corporate world, and I kind of still wanted to take a project and bite into it and see it through to the end of its end of its life cycle. And I met my co-founder kind of serendipitously, and his name's Josh. He was a robotics engineer. So if you can imagine the big arms on production lines that build cars and put them together autonomously. And he also ran a consultancy on the side building big special purpose UAVs for industrial purposes. And we got posed this question that came from a regional government in Australia about, could a drone be used to move chemotherapy medication in the country? We kind of thought, well, the answer is yes, it is possible technically for it to happen, but we thought the real question was, what does the system look like that can do that, safely, reliably, and sustainably every day of the week? Because it's very easy to do something once and very hard to do it continuously. And we looked around at the market and said, we think a lot of people are taking toy drones and trying to turn them into a delivery drone. And we said, well, what happens if we took the Hercules and all the systems that surrounded that and the aviation safety systems and the maintenance profile and shrunk that down from a 70-ton aircraft into a 15-kilogram aircraft that is electric and 3D printed and autonomous? And we thought, we think we've got the right skill set to do that. So we founded the company, sought out some venture capital investment, which has been a vast learning journey for us. And fast forward about 2.5 years from that day, and we're here we are today, having operated in 4 countries, about to launch into a 5th and 6th, and operating one of the biggest drone logistics networks in Malawi. And that's kind of a brief backstory to the company, where we came from. Yeah,
and it's incredible. And everybody that I look at, and people who come on this show are younger than me, but my goodness me, you've managed to pack in an awful lot of excitement and adventure that most people would only dream about in those years. So fair play. Now, you've also given the clue away. So obviously the company is all about drones, okay, but it's also, as you say, a managed air transport service, and also an on-demand healthcare with Aeromedical Logistics. and the main point is improving lives, which is fantastic. Now, when you met Josh Temper, obviously it was shall we say, a marriage made in heaven between the two of you. What were your immediate motivations to address the countries that you're now in? So you've got, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've won tenders in Vanuatu, the Republic of the Congo. You've got Malawi and Mozambique. That's correct, yeah?
That's correct, yeah.
So now, what was the motivation of addressing those specific areas?
So I think one of the core drivers for everyone involved in the company is we all wanted to try and solve a big challenge and use, and ultimately use the skills that we had that meant that we could use technology to solve these challenges. And so initially our initial focus of work was looking at healthcare in regional Australia and how we could, redesign a supply chain around actually being able to use air transport in the first and last mile, particularly in a health context, because health's interesting and it's impact driven. And so then in 2018, we stumbled across a tender that was going to be released, by the Vanuatu government and UNICEF for a drone delivery of vaccines. And we thought, well, a lot of our work to date had focused on the ability to pick up blood samples and bring them back to a lab, but actually the system would be very, very good to be deployed in this setting on a Pacific island, and to take. Sometimes it was taking 2 days to get 50 doses of vaccine from a hospital or a village to have it administered. There's an opportunity there to bring that time right down to tens of minutes. And so we applied for the tender. It was the first tender ever released for drone delivery, and we won it. 21 companies around the world applied for these tenders, and we were awarded 2 contracts, which was really exciting, covering 2 island groups and something like 8 islands in total in Vanuatu. And I sold up the house, and we had our initial fleet of aircraft, and we put them all on a boat and took them over there and went and lived there for 5 months. And that, I think you need to
explain. You probably need to explain to people where Vanuatu is.
Yeah, so Vanuatu is an archipelago group of islands. There's something like 1,100 islands, 62 of which are inhabited in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And so if you go northeast from Australia for about 5 hours, that's where Vanuatu is, in the middle of the ocean, near Fiji. A lot of people know where Fiji is.
Yeah.
It's a couple of hours away from Fiji in an airliner. And so it's kind of just small volcanic islands with little population clusters on them. Some of the nicest people you'll ever meet, but just very, very remote. And there are a lot of on the bigger islands. It's kind of a holiday destination. People go there like Fiji for a holiday, but once you're off the main island, it is very, very remote and very, very rural. And there were some challenges with how the supply chain works in these islands, and that's what we were there to work with UNICEF to see if we could solve with the technology.
Brilliant, absolutely superb. Now, some of the things, and everybody hears what's pumped out in the news and about drones interfering with airports and holding flights up and causing problems and people using them that aren't qualified, etc. Now, can you just assure everybody and also emphasize the strict safety guidelines and also the capabilities of the drones and the operators, obviously, which is so important?
Yeah, definitely. I think a common mistake for technology companies trying to come into this space is they have this idea that they're going to use these small little aircraft and they're going to be democratized into the airspace and it'll be there to access for everyone. But actually, without a bit of background in aviation, most people don't realize that actually aviation is extraordinarily safe. You're much, much more likely to be struck by lightning actually than die in an airline crash. And that's because aviation's highly regulated, because over the 100 or so years of aviation, we've learned that that's needed to keep everyone safe, because it is putting a steel tube into the sky and flying it at 1,000 miles an hour is a dangerous thing unless it's done properly and it's done safely. And so rather than try and challenge that and be a bit of a fly by the night cowboy and break the rules, our approach has always been, actually, we're just going to work really closely with the aviation communities and aviation regulators everywhere we operate, whether that's Vanuatu or whether it's Malawi or whether it's, Melbourne or Sydney. And the aviation regulator in here or the civil aviation over in the UK, we seek to work really closely with them to look at, okay, how do we safely integrate a new technology into the airspace? Because the airspace has been there and it's been operating with aircraft for the better part of 100 years now at a commercial scale. And it's not about just putting something out there and letting it go. It's about how do we can deliver real value with this. There's a need for it. And so how can we safely work together with what's already existing to deliver that value? And that's kind of our approach to it.
No, and I think that's very wise as well. Now, obviously, topically, and some of the news that's coming out now, I think some of the restrictions, some of the corridors, and some of obviously the press loves to pick holes in things that aren't as clear as possibly they were meant to be when they were announced. But one of the things that everybody's talking about now is the Northern Hemisphere second wave that's expected to come. So I think everybody realizes that there's a balance between the financial side and people having to generate enough revenues to keep businesses operating until next March, April, or whatever it will be. But also, whilst the development of vaccines is in place, these vaccines are going to have to be distributed everywhere. Now, there's enough challenges under normal conditions because people are now looking at storage, aircraft movement, etc. And we've spoken about cold chain before. How are you now looking at introducing those distribution areas and the types of services that you've already provided? So you've got testing which can be done remotely. You can fly samples in and out for testing, and you've also got the day turnaround and spoilage rates that are important for people to consider. Can you just explain a little bit about those areas?
Yeah, definitely. I think the one where every country we've operated in today, we operate outside of the drone corridors, and they're fantastic to kind of drive innovation and get the aviation regulators used to working with drones in the airspace. Yep. Some countries we've gone in and operated, and we work very closely with the regulators and the local aviation community to make that happen. And some places like Malawi and Australia, for example, they're two countries where the regulators are quite used to working with this technology. And if we go over there and work with them to establish a level of trust so that we can be trusted to operate in the airspace with everyone else. And so if we look at Malawi, since February this year, we've done something like 1,100 flights. I think we've delivered over 1,000 units of PPE. We've done 33 specific flights related to COVID, delivered 8,000 doses of vaccine. And this is all happening in an environment where there's movement restricted because you want to stop the spread of a highly infectious virus between different regions in a community is potentially already facing health challenges like tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, even the measles is a problem in some of the emerging countries. So what the technology and what you actually allow is if you have a drone logistics network established in place, it becomes extraordinarily valuable in being able to traverse regions that otherwise movement would be restricted between them, to enable the health supply chain and the economies within those regions to actually keep functioning without adding additional risk of disease transmission into that section of the supply chain, which is really interesting. And it's kind of the pandemic in and of itself has highlighted the value of this technology and this service when it is already in place. And so one of the challenges is that people are kind of asking this question, where's drone delivery now? We're in the pandemic, and it would be really useful now, but it's kind of not there. And the value add is when that service is already in place, that's when it can be really harnessed in times of need to generate additional value. So on a day-to-day basis, it gives this new modality into the supply chain where people can overcome traffic or waterways or congestion in the city and allow that supply chain to function really smoothly day to day. But then when it's 100x, 1,000x in value is when there's a unique event that's creating additional turbulence in that area. And the pandemic's a really good example of when the network's up and running. The network we've got in southern Malawi, it's very, very valuable when it is up and running. And so for us, it's about, as we continue to roll out a service across new areas, it's about we're going to add resilience from day one, but when it's needed, we can turn that agility on and really help to support it.
Yeah.
And so where you've got, you know, in the UK, there's some networks operating in Northern Ireland, in the corridors. That's going to be a really good proof case to help civil aviation over in the UK understand that value add and then be ready to enable it to be deployed more broadly if it's needed.
You know, and I would imagine now as well, it's also part of emergency response and contingency and mitigation plans as well, if the proof of concept works.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's at least one emergency delivery a week that we're doing in southern Malawi. And the more we expand that network and the more healthcare centres that we cover, the more often we're going to get, you know, demands of, this is a critical, you know, unit of medication, whether it's, you know, oxytocin from mother that's just given birth, or, you know, we've done a couple of antivenoms, we've done a couple of rabies vaccines now that have to be administered very, very quickly after injury or after a bite. And so those, you know, the ability to make that resupply when otherwise it just wasn't possible by the ground, you know, that's incredibly valuable. And we're going to see more types of emergency response. You know, people often talk about defibrillator delivery out, or antivenom are two ones that are definitely very time critical, or you see blood plasma is another one where these are things that are needed, you know, within the golden hour after something's happened, that the resupply is needed. And this is a technology and a service enabled by technology that can make that happen when it's in place.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Can I ask you something else? Just something that just come to my mind now. So if you had to send in for testing into a contaminated area, obviously, now just explain, are those test kits dropped? Does the drone land? If it does, how then is it sanitized when it comes back to base?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll actually talk you through what we're seeing in Malawi at the moment, which is a very interesting example. We get a requirement for testing kits to be delivered to a certain site because they have a number of tests they want to do. So we have a full sanitization procedure the aircraft go through before they take off. So they are fully, they're sprayed just like a commercial airliner is sprayed. Actually, we follow the same IATA dangerous goods regulation as full-size commercial airliner. So they're effectively sprayed down to be sanitized. The cargo is loaded into a sealed box. It's flown out to the site. So they have testing kits in them. The aircraft lands. They have designated landing spots at the hospital where they land, and they can, you know, either land by a GPS only, or they can land by like visual identification of the landing zone. They land down very accurately. What we're seeing is that the aircraft sits on the ground. They take the testing kits out of the aircraft. They actually administer the tests while the aircraft's sitting there waiting on the ground. There's no real, the aircraft can sit there and wait for as long as needed. So we're seeing kind of somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour that the aircraft's on the ground while they're administering, you know, 20 or so tests to people. The tests are all sealed up in their little test kits. They're marked. They go back into the payload box. The paperwork goes into the payload box. Boxes sealed back up. Boxes sanitized. Put in the payload bay of the aircraft. The aircraft, any touch points that have been touched are sanitized and sprayed, and the launch is initiated and it flies back to base. And of course, everyone interacting with the aircraft's in PPE and has gloves on and masks on. So, and the aircraft flies back to the base. The box is unloaded. It isn't. We don't. When the aircraft's payload, it isn't unsealed by us. It's given as a sealed box back to the hospital staff, and they process the samples for testing. And that's what we're seeing. And that's I've just step by step walked you through the process of going through.
Yeah. No, but it's good. But it's also a confidence booster to know that you know the regulations and the guidelines and the rules are being maintained at all times.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a common theme for us, is that we're not here to rewrite the book, where it's all an existing system that's proven to be safe. And we're going to work with regulators to evolve it where it can be evolved. But otherwise, we're here to comply and here to make sure that everything's safe, whether that's from a health perspective or a dangerous goods perspective or just an airspace perspective.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you is that obviously there is certain safe drop principles as well from zones. Do you operate? Yeah. Do you operate with that as well or not?
Yeah, definitely. We at the moment we're not operationally deploying like a parachute drop capability, although we have it. A lot of our operations, we don't only drop stuff in, but we are picking goods up and bringing them back. So we haven't actually operationally deployed a parachute drop setup yet. I've always been a little bit nervous about it because we used to do them the Hercules, and there's a lot of different variables. The wind and the drift of the parachutes coming in, and we also the products themselves are often very valuable. If you're talking about blood plasma is a good example. If it's subjected to something like 2Gs, you can separate out different components within the blood plasma and increase the potential toxicity of that blood to a patient that it's being administered to. So, where our model at the moment has been built around landing and enabling hands-on or an automated delivery with a machine, if you really want to deploy that out in the field, rather than parachute dropping stuff in. Although it is a capability we've looked at, particularly in some discussions around Ebola response in places like the Congo, where parachute dropping or winching in makes a lot of sense. But we haven't seen a need to deploy that just yet.
Okay, very good. And just to reconfirm the basic statistics, so we're talking about up to a 3 kilo payload with the aircraft itself, total weight 15, and it can go 100 kilometers in distance.
Yeah, there are headline metrics at the moment, and as we see battery technology improve, and a few different iterations on the aircraft, we're going to see those numbers increase a little bit over the next 12 months as we deploy our 5th generation platform. But at the moment, they're the headline metrics we stick to, and we like to be able to guarantee a level of service to our customers. So we're kind of taking into consideration things like headwind and weather conditions, and the aircraft themselves are built to be able to hit those numbers within about 90% of weather conditions. So if there's an airliner flying, we can hit those numbers more or less.
Yeah, very good. And you touch base there on the weather conditions and the influencing factors there. So in general, it's always within that 50 minutes, or as you said earlier, within the golden hour, which is so important in so many areas.
Yeah, that's what we aim for, and we also operate on the same kind of performance reliability metrics, on-time performance metrics at an airliner. An airliner wouldn't, we hold ourselves to that. So when we're working with the customer, if we can't deliver up to the on-time performance metrics, we don't get paid.
Yeah, no, good. Now, before I come to just looking at vaccines and the cold chain, and something that you referred to earlier about spoilage rates, people will probably be wondering, why is he sitting in his lounge or in his study in such a strong, it looks like a very, very padded jacket. Now, people are going to realize how environmentally friendly you are, but now I'm going to ask you to tell them exactly how.
Yeah, I think we were talking to you about this before the show, but we're really big. The company, one of our core service delivery pillars is sustainability, and I kind of live that down to, I actually put on a jacket before I turn the heating on at home, and so actually we don't have the heating on at the moment. I've got the jacket on, because I'm quite comfortable sitting here at home with the jacket on, and I was also saying that I do some simple things like we turn all the PowerPoints off at the PowerPoint, and the microwave. It's a little bit annoying having to turn it on and off, but it's doing the right thing by the environment, and we kind of lived that through everything we do at work. All our operations today are off-grid. We're using solar very heavily to recharge the batteries. The aircraft themselves are 3D printed with a plastic that is biodegradable over time, so we can ultimately just bury them and the plastic in the aircraft breaks down. And we do some cool stuff, like when the batteries can't be used anymore in the aircraft because the performance rating of them drops a little bit, we're starting to build out some simple things like power walls or battery banks for uses in the communities we operate in to kind of make sure that we can recycle the technology where possible. So in fact, sustainability is one of our core tenets, and it is our primary focus, that we want to deploy a sustainable, reliable and safe service. And that's kind of what we think and how we operate.
That's brilliant. Absolutely superb. You've just reminded me something now. As far as the drone operation, you were talking about batteries. Okay, so the power of the drone, okay, and for it to operate properly and not to be affected too much by adverse weather conditions, etc. So can you just explain about how the drone is powered up, how it maintains the flight, etc. So again, people can have a better understanding.
Yeah, definitely. So we kind of design the whole flight area that we're operating in. We designate where there are villages and where areas we'd want to avoid. And then we effectively build highways in the sky is the best way to think of it, or air routes for those more known to how this thing operates, and then departure and arrival paths into different healthcare centres. And then the aircraft itself, it has a lithium-ion battery set in it. About 1/100th of what's in a Tesla, if that's a comparison. So 100 of our aircraft use the same. If we had 100 aircraft, we'd have the same amount of battery capacity as a Tesla car. And so they're recharged. We're mainly recharging off solar in the areas we're operating in at the moment. And then when the aircraft's ready to take off, it effectively has a payload put into it. We have a back-end control system that can integrate into a logistics software, or you can enter it kind of through an app interface and say, well, I've just loaded up this particular aircraft with this payload, and this is where it needs to go. The aircraft gets that shot down to it through a satellite, and it says, hey, you need to go here. It assembles its flight path. And then, you can, the healthcare worker can use the app to say, yep, I'm ready for the aircraft to take off, or as simple as pressing a button. The aircraft talks, so the aircraft will talk to you. It has lights that change color to indicate different flight statuses, and effectively green means go, and it will say I'm ready to go, and they initiate the takeoff, and then it takes off. It flies on route itself. While it's flying, it's fully autonomous. Effectively, it's monitored. We generally have one operator monitoring somewhere between 3 and 5 aircraft these days, and it's flying along its flight route. It's watching the ground below it. It knows what the weather's like. It knows what the wind's like. It knows if it's raining. It's monitoring all its own internal systems. It can detect other aviation traffic out in the airspace. So if something looks like it's coming close to it, it'll avoid it, or it'll turn around and fly back home and go, no, there was another aircraft on the flight route. I'm going to turn around and fly home, and we'll reload it and send it again. But other than that, it comes in, it lands at the other end. We either do a GPS landing, or we use computer vision to make sure it's all safe to land below it. Aircraft comes down and lands. Healthcare workers, we've got 70 healthcare workers in Malawi trained to interact with the aircraft. So they know what to do. They're following some really easy online training, and they've got a little one-page document to remind them of like a checklist of how they operate. Open the lid up, do the payload exchange, and press a button and send it back home. It's that simple.
And it's also important then to to pass on some of those skills locally as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, in Malawi is a really good example, and everywhere we operate and we stand up new networks, we employ and train and upskill a local workforce. So at the moment, due to the requirements of COVID, the aircraft are monitored from Australia. So they're piloted from Australia. Our 2 pilots are very luckily living on the central coast of New South Wales at the moment, which is a bit of an idyllic place to live. And but they're in a full night cycle, so they sleep all day, and they basically work on Malawian time, and they're monitoring the network operating day to day. And then we have, I think it's a 6-person team now in Malawi that are local Malawians. Some of them have been through the UNICEF African Drone and Data Academy, or some of them we've trained ourselves as well. And that whole workforce day to day, they're operating on the ground for us, talking to the local healthcare staff, doing community sensitization and engagement just with the people, so that when we open up a new healthcare centre, not only do we train the healthcare staff, but the whole community knows that when you see a white Swoop Aero aircraft landing into the hospital, it's there delivering medical supplies, and it's not there taking photos, it's just there to do work for the community. And so we've step by step gone out and deployed that, across something like 30 or 40 communities now in Malawi. And you'll see the same thing replicated as we scale up in any country, whether that's, Malawi again, or Australia, or South Africa, or Mozambique, or New Zealand, or the UK. We operate the same model there.
Yeah. So the PR and the communication and information streams are so important, so that people don't either get panicked or they don't think it's something, for different purposes and reasons. And I think it's so important that even visually people can see and identify the difference. Is that capability there with your drones?
Yeah, definitely. That's a big focus of ours, is that communication piece and the knowledge that actually the aircraft have quite a distinct shape and they're only used for this one thing, and making sure that's communicated very broadly. And that's not an emerging market problem. In fact, that would be just as relevant in Australia, where
exactly,
or the UK or anywhere, that people need to be made to feel comfortable that this technology is being used for the benefit of society. And so when they see an aircraft flying over, they're not fearful of it. They know that actually it's not taking pictures. It's not a surveillance aircraft. It's actually it's basically an ambulance in the sky. And it's there to move medical products around to help the health system. And that's one reason that's all we do as a company. We think that message is so important generate buy-in of this service, that we don't do pipeline inspections, or we don't do long-range surveillance or anything like that. All we focus on is logistics within the health supply chain.
Yeah, I think that's so important for people to be at their ease. Now, the origins, the name genesis for the name. So not only on that wonderfully warm jacket of yours, but you've got that lovely bird, which is the Kookaburra. And you want to tell us the traits of the Kookaburra, which is how Swoop became the name.
Yeah, definitely. So Kookaburra is actually the name of the aircraft, is a Kookaburra. That's what we call it. And so what Kookaburras do in Australia is a kind of a larrikin, a bird. They have a very distinct cackling laugh that people who have been to the Australian country will be aware of. They're quite friendly. They'll come down, and even wild Kookaburras, you can hand feed some mincemeat or something like that. But one thing they're known to do in particular is they do swoop down and catch snakes and then fly back up into the air with them. And so that's kind of, a bit of a larrikin, loud, friendly Australian bird that's known to swoop in and swoop back out, is kind of, the emblem that's embodying what we do as a company. And that's where the logo came from. The
Swoop Aero, right. Thanks for clearing that one up.
And the name as well.
Yeah. And also with that attribute, so we spoke earlier about now how the demand for vaccines, once they come on board, and even on the news this morning here in the UK, they were talking about the UK government, actually facilitating up to 260 million units of vaccine. So, enough to cover the population here and more, but obviously they're spreading their avenues. Now, with that, and to speed things up, obviously this is an ideal opportunity for less densely populated areas. Keeping it at the right temperature and maintaining temperatures. And like I said, you spoke earlier about spoilage rates. Do you want to just say the difference now between the spoilage rates of this particular service and some other transportation modes?
Yeah, definitely. So you've kind of hit a core vein of vaccine transport there, is that vaccines generally have to be kept between 2 and 8 degrees. They're very, very temperature sensitive. And same thing when you're returning things like blood samples to the lab, they have, temperature levels that if they go outside of, they're no good. So for a vaccine, you can't administer the dose, which means, an expensive vaccine is kind of thrown away, or for something like a blood sample, it means that it gets to the lab, it's no good, and you've got to take another blood test and get that sample retested. And so, the key thing around being able to integrate air transport into this kind of last and first mile of a health supply chain, and really traverse the most difficult bits of the logistics journey quickly. Some of the stats we've seen from places like Malawi, where we've been operating, is that we can take the turnaround time from having a blood test, getting your result, from something like 2 weeks down to 2 or 3 days, which is, bringing it into what we'd experience in somewhere like Australia or the UK. And the spoilage rates, we kind of have something like 50% of samples being spoiled because they're taking too long to get to the lab. And we're kind of reducing that down into the 1 to 5% range, where, which is what we see in somewhere like Australia, where almost all of the samples get back to the lab in time to be tested. And we have much less spoilage in the vaccine supply chain as well. So by enabling, the vaccines to go from the place where they're being stored to the end point in, minutes or under an hour, instead of somewhere from 2 hours to 2 days of transport time, just enables, us to make sure that they're getting transported for the government and for the NGOs to the end point of use, and they're going to be good to go when they get there, which is super important for the people who are relying on the health system to keep them healthy.
No, which is fantastic. That's really good. Now, the other thing that I thought stood out was when you were talking about the success of the tenders and the numbers of companies that you were competing with. So that competition and that market is growing hugely now, huh?
Yeah, I think it's, 2018 was the first competitive tender for medical drone delivery ever. And then in 2019, we won something like another 4 tenders in the next year that are, more tenders have gone out. And every time we go in for a tender in a pilot program, and then off the back of the pilot program, you assess the the efficacy of the implementation of the supply chain? Was it creating value? And then where the answer is yes, we generally find that we're partnering with the NGO we're working with to further roll out the network so that we don't have to stop the operation and then go through a process to restart. We can develop such a relationship that we're able to continue rolling out a service to increase our level of impact in those environments. And everywhere that we've been working to date, we've seen an expansion of the network operation and an increase of the value there. And I think over the competitive tenders are very valuable because it makes sure that the people buying the service are getting the best solution. That's the beauty of market competition. And I think for the next 12 months, we're likely going to see a number of bigger tenders from different governments around the world, whether you're talking about Australia or places like Indonesia and through Southeast Asia, Africa, or even up into Europe. We're going to see a lot more competitive tenders being released where we have the opportunity to demonstrate what a service enabled by this technology can do and be selected competitively against a peer group, which is ultimately going to get the best outcomes for the health system, which is what we operate in. And whether we're selected or not, that competition will deliver the best outcomes, and it's very valuable that it's there, and it should be there.
And it also pushes you to develop more and create more as well.
That's right.
Now, can I ask you something? As part of that development and challenges for the future, what's the difficulty in increasing the payload?
So we have a very unique, our approach to this problem is actually very unique in that what we aim to do is to keep the unit cost of the aircraft very, very low. And essentially, rather than doubling, if we were to double the payload of the aircraft, it would probably 10x the cost of the aircraft, because it would push the aircraft into a weight category that requires additional systems on board. It requires additional batteries. It would be depreciated differently, and there's kind of a spiraling cost effect there. So our approach is to keep the aircraft as light as possible and optimize for the payload weight versus weight of the aircraft, while we're keeping the cost of the aircraft very low. And so if you can imagine that rather than sending an aircraft that's twice as big to fly twice as much payload, we just send two of the aircraft, one after the other. And that's our approach to an operating model, in that we can optimize for the overall cost of the delivery based on the asset cost and the energy consumption in that movement. And to put it into context of something in a bigger airline sense, it's like, would you want to send two 787s or one A380? And I think we'll see a lot of the airlines now are saying, actually, it's making a lot more sense to send two 787s to carry the equivalent passenger volume as one A380, because the asset cost is lower, using much more energy, much less fuel to get there, and it's better for all the flexibility in the system. And that's the approach we're taking. And we think somewhere in 3 to 5 kilos payload and less than 25 kilos all up weight is our sweet spot.
Okay, that's very good.
With.
Now we're coming near to the end of the session, and I've got a nice simple question for you. Okay, now for me, listening to everything that you've done and the way you've articulated it, it's fantastic. Seriously. So Eric, superb. Honestly, I could listen to you for a long time. And that bottle of wine in the background there, which we know is not a bottle of wine, it's a fancy opener. But I could sit and listen to you.
It's a secret corkscrew.
Yeah, but I could sit and listen to you for a long time on this particular subject matter. Now, the question: when you are as old as me, and you're talking to someone in your position, how far do you think this newness will have developed in that amount of time? And you don't have to be dead on the year. You can just assume that I am older than you.
I mean, our goal as a company is to reach 100 million people in the next 5 years, and ultimately to continue that growth, to see a service enabled by small autonomous aircraft to reach half the world's population by 2030. And so what I think we will see increasingly is that technology, services enabled by this technology will enable increasingly positive outcomes across the world for a large percentage of the population. And I think what we'll see is that the technology will be harnessed to be less small aircraft buzzing around, delivering burritos and donuts to people, and commercial scale application of this technology to really enable positive outcomes for services that help people day to day. And that's where I think the technology is going, and that's kind of the path we're driving down into the future. And my piece of advice, if I was sitting in your position and talking to someone like me in, I'm going to say 15 years time.
I love you, son. Hey, you just gone right up there in my estimation.
It would be to be fearless in the goals you're trying to chase. You and I chatted before the call, and there's no way 2 or 3 years ago I could have guessed that I'd be sitting here having this discussion, pursuing this line of work, using like autonomous drones to deliver health outcomes for people across the world. And really, the piece of advice would be for people to be fearless in the challenges they're trying to solve, and just to take the leap and give it a go.
No, I think that's absolutely superb, and you must go to bed every night feeling proud of what yourself and what Josh have created and the impacts that you're making on so many lives. It's admirable. I think it's appreciated by so many, and fair play to you. And you also seem like a lovely fella as well.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate that.
No, really, honestly, genuinely, I've really enjoyed. I've learned a lot, and it's something that, I think any youngsters now who are at university or going to university, it's something that if they can harness their intelligence and their, like you said, their fearlessness, then there are no barriers. So it'd be brilliant. Do you guys link up with universities and schools and give advisory on how and why the benefits there? And the point you've made there about positive outcomes, we do a show on a Saturday morning with a guy called Steve Dixon from Skylight Aviation. And what we're saying now is we're sort of getting tired of the term new normal, because nobody actually knows what that's going to be. So what we're focusing on now is planned positives that people keep coming up with and keep people, energized, because even if we're going to go into another dark period, everybody has to understand that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And if we all work together as best as possible, that light will shine brighter quicker.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have, something like 30 people at head office, plus the operations teams now out in the country is operating the networks. And we, every single person is encouraged to talk, whether it's to a local school or talk to universities. And it's all about, helping people understand the impact they can have by trying to face up a new challenge and what the positive impacts that technology can have anywhere across the world. And I think we encourage everyone to do that. Last week, I think I said I was speaking my high school careers night it's been a while since I was at high school now, but speaking to the people coming up at high school, and it's a bit of a turbulent time at the moment. Think what does the future look like, and just kind of painting a picture of what is possible in a career. And we encourage everyone to do that, not only from a technology standpoint, but just from an impact standpoint, and that you can have impact in the world in lots of different ways.
100%. Yep, from crisis to care. And one of the things that this crisis is doing is it's speeding up the acceptance and of technology and digitalization, and making things a lot quicker than if we'd have been before, with all the admin and bureaucracy and blockers. So I think things are speeding up the way they should do as well. Eric.
Yeah, I'd definitely say.
Thank you, sir. Really enjoyed it. I wish you great success, and please keep in touch with us so we can see how you do. And please God, I'd love to be speaking to you in 5 years and know that you'd hit that 100 million people target, which I'm sure you will.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. It's been a pleasure, and definitely I'll keep you updated on how we're tracking.
Yeah, please do. Thanks very much indeed.